I knew something was horribly wrong the moment I opened my eyes and saw a man standing in the doorway of my bedroom. He wasn't moving, he wasn't speaking, he was just standing there, watching me. And the worst part is that I recognized him immediately. He was the same man I had been seeing all day at the festival. At least, that's what I believed at the time. But to explain why that moment still haunts me years later, I have to go back to the beginning. I was 26 years old when my friend Alyssa and I finally made it to our first major music festival. For years, we had talked about going. Every spring, we'd send each other posts online about how amazing it looked. Huge crowds, colorful outfits, giant stages in the desert, and music playing almost nonstop. But something always got in the way. One year, it was money. Another year, Alyssa couldn't get time off work. Another year, I had just started a new job and couldn't take vacation days yet. So when everything finally lined up that year, we didn't hesitate. We booked flights to California, found a small Airbnb about 20 minutes from the festival grounds, and planned a full long weekend around it. Neither of us had ever been to anything that big before. We had gone to concerts, sure, but those were usually smaller venues, maybe a few thousand people at most. This festival had tens of thousands. When we arrived on the first day, it honestly felt like stepping into another world. The entire place was buzzing with energy. Everywhere you looked, there were people dressed in wild outfits, feathers, glitter, neon colors, things that looked more like costumes than clothes. Music was coming from multiple stages at once, blending together in the air. People were dancing in the grass, sitting in circles, laughing, taking pictures, and acting like they didn't have a single responsibility in the world. For the first hour or so, Alyssa and I were almost overwhelmed. Not in a bad way, just in the sense that there was so much happening around us that our brains were struggling to take it all in. But once we adjusted, we started having an amazing time. The first 2 days were honestly perfect. We saw artists we had been listening to for years. We took hundreds of pictures. We ate ridiculously overpriced food from the vendor stands. We stayed out late every night and came back to the Airbnb exhausted but happy. By the third day, though, the exhaustion was definitely starting to catch up with us. We had barely slept the whole weekend. Between the heat, the crowds, the walking, and the late nights, our bodies were running purely on adrenaline. But it was the final day, and neither of us wanted to waste a single minute of it. Before the trip, Alyssa had brought up the idea of bringing something extra for the last day, specifically Molly. I had only tried it once before in college, and it hadn't been a bad experience. So, after thinking about it for a while, I agreed. We both said we'd save it for the final day of the festival. Looking back now, that decision still bothers me, because I'll never know how much of what happened that night was influenced by it. We took it sometime in the late afternoon before one of the sets we were really excited for. At first, nothing happened. We walked around between stages, grabbed drinks, and kept waiting for it to kick in. After about 30 minutes, I remember turning to Alyssa and joking that maybe the stuff we brought was weak. She laughed and said she wasn't feeling anything either, but then suddenly it hit. Hard. At first, it was actually kind of great. Everything felt lighter. The music sounded incredible, like every beat was vibrating through my whole body. The colors around the festival seemed brighter. The energy of the crowd felt contagious. I remember thinking I finally understood why people talked about doing it at music festivals. But after about an hour, something started to feel off. At first, it was just a small thing. I kept noticing the same man. The first time I saw him, he was maybe 20 feet away in the crowd. He looked a little older than most people around us, mid-30s maybe. He had dark hair, some scruffy facial hair, and he was wearing a plain black shirt with boots. That alone made him stand out because almost everyone else was wearing bright, flashy outfits. He wasn't doing anything strange. He was just standing there, looking in our direction. At the time, I didn't think much of it. In a crowd that big, it's normal to notice the same person more than once. But then I saw him again, later near a drink stand. Then again while Alyssa and I were walking between stages. Then again when we stopped near a fence trying to decide where to go next. After the fourth or fifth time, I finally mentioned it. I told Alyssa I kept seeing the same guy everywhere. She immediately laughed. She said it was probably the Molly making me focus too hard on random people. And honestly, part of me believed her. But something about it still didn't sit right with me. Because it didn't feel like random coincidence. It felt like every time I turned around, he was there somewhere. Not right next to me, just always within sight. Hours went by like that. I tried to ignore it and enjoy the festival, but the high started feeling different. Instead of that warm, happy feeling from earlier, I started feeling restless. My jaw was clenched. My heart felt like it was beating too fast. The noise of the crowd suddenly felt overwhelming. I told myself it was probably dehydration or exhaustion. We had been walking around in the sun all weekend. It made sense. But the feeling wouldn't go away. Then something happened that made things even worse. We were standing in a packed crowd waiting for another performance to start when the man suddenly appeared right beside me. He moved in casually, like he was just another friendly festival stranger. He started dancing near me and leaning closer so I could hear him over the music. He told me I looked good, asked if I was there with anyone. His tone wasn't aggressive exactly, but it was pushy. I tried to be polite. I smiled awkwardly and told him I was there with my friend. I hoped that would be enough to get him to move on, but he stayed there, hovering, trying to keep the conversation going. The situation was already making me uncomfortable. So I turned to pull Alyssa closer so we could just leave the crowd together. And that's when I realized she wasn't there anymore. My stomach dropped instantly. I spun around looking for her. At first, I thought maybe she had just stepped a few feet away. But no matter where I looked, I couldn't see her. That panic hit me faster than it normally would have because of how strange I already felt. The man noticed me looking around. He asked if I lost my friend. I said yes. Then he said something that immediately made my skin crawl. He said he could help me find her. Something about the way he said it felt wrong. Too eager, too interested. I told him no thanks and started pushing my way out of the crowd. He didn't grab me, but I could feel his eyes on me as I walked away. Eventually, I made it out of the crowd and found a quieter area further back near a grassy patch. I sat down because I suddenly felt like my body was shutting down. My vision started doing something strange. It wasn't blurry exactly. It was more like everything around me looked slightly wavy, like nothing could stay perfectly still. The lights from the stages looked like they were vibrating. Even people walking by looked distorted. That's when I realized I might be having a really bad reaction. I tried calling Alyssa. The first few calls didn't go through. The festival had terrible phone service because of how many people were there. I kept trying over and over. Eventually, one call finally connected. I told her where I was and that something felt really wrong. She found me maybe 15 minutes later. The second she saw me, she knew I wasn't okay. I told her I needed to leave. She didn't argue. We walked out of the festival early that night. The walk back felt endless. Every loud noise made me jump. Every stranger walking past made me nervous. I kept looking around, expecting to see that same man again. But I never did. When we finally got back to the Airbnb, both of us were completely drained. We still had one night left before flying home the next evening. Alyssa said she might start packing some of her stuff early, but I was too exhausted to even think about it. I just wanted to lie down. Even though I still felt weird from the drugs, my body felt so physically tired that I didn't care. I crawled into bed, turned the lights off, and closed my eyes. At some point, I drifted into that strange half-asleep state where you're not fully unconscious, but you're not really awake either. I don't know how long I was like that, but eventually something woke me up. Maybe a noise, maybe just instinct. I opened my eyes and looked toward the bedroom doorway, and that's when I saw him. A tall figure standing just inside the doorway, completely still. For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. I thought maybe it was Alyssa standing there, but the shape was wrong. Too tall, too broad. Then my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I saw the face. Even in the low light, I was certain it was the same man from the festival. He was standing there watching me. A cold wave of fear rushed through my entire body. I started screaming. Not yelling, actual screaming. I pulled the blankets over my head and kept screaming as loud as I could. 8 seconds later, Alyssa burst into the room and flipped on the light. The doorway was empty. No one was there. She kept asking what happened. I could barely speak because I was shaking so badly. Eventually, I told her what I saw. She looked scared, but she also kept saying the same thing, that it must have been the drugs, that I was still having a bad trip. Part of me wanted to believe her, because the other possibility was much worse. Still, something about what I saw felt too real. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt like waking up and seeing an actual person standing in your room. I begged Alyssa to sleep in my bed that night. She agreed. Neither of us wanted to sleep much after that anyway. We left the hallway light on and talked quietly for a long time until eventually exhaustion caught up with us. Sometime later, we both drifted off. The next morning, I woke up to Alyssa screaming my name. She was shaking my shoulder and pointing toward the hallway. I sat up and looked down at the floor, and that's when my stomach dropped. There were muddy boot prints on the hardwood floor. They started near the front of the house. They continued down the hallway, and they stopped directly in front of my bedroom doorway, exactly where I had seen that figure standing. Then the prints turned around and went back down the hallway toward the front door. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. We just stared at them. That was when I realized something that still terrifies me. What I saw that night wasn't just a hallucination. Someone had actually been inside that house. And unless it was some impossible coincidence, it was the same man who had been watching us all day at the festival. We packed faster than I thought humanly possible. Neither of us showered. Neither of us ate. We just threw everything into our suitcases and got out of there. Later, we contacted the Airbnb host and explained that someone had broken into the house during the night. We even sent pictures of the boot prints. The host sounded shocked, but by that point, I didn't care about apologies. I just wanted to go home. We spent the rest of that day on edge until it was finally time to go to the airport. Nothing else happened. But that experience stayed with me. What scares me the most is that I still don't know how he found us. Maybe he followed us when we left the festival. Maybe he watched from a distance. Maybe he saw which ride we got into. I'll never know. But I do know one thing. I never touched Molly again after that night. And even years later, the first thing I do every night before I fall asleep is glance at the doorway, just to make sure no one is standing there. Before we move on to the next story, I want to hear what you think about this one. Have you ever had a strange or creepy experience while traveling or staying somewhere unfamiliar? Let me know in the comments below. I read as many of them as I can, and some of the most interesting ones might even appear in a future video. And if you're enjoying these true horror stories so far, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next disturbing story coming up. The first time I noticed him, he was standing in the background of a photo. At least, that's what I thought at the time. But later that night, when I saw the same man staring at me from the darkness of the beach, I realized it probably wasn't a coincidence. And the moment he showed up outside my bedroom window, I understood that someone had been watching us far longer than I realized. This happened during the summer after my junior year of college. My girlfriend at the time, Valentina, invited me to visit her family in Southern California. She had been asking me to come out there for months, but between school and work, I kept putting it off. Finally, that summer, I had a little time, and my parents basically pushed me to go. They said I had been working too much and needed a break, so I booked a flight and flew across the country. The trip itself felt long and exhausting. When I finally landed, I checked my phone and saw a message from Valentina telling me to come outside the airport because she and her dad were already there waiting. They picked me up in an old Toyota pickup that looked like it had been around since the early 2000s. The drive to their house took maybe 30 minutes. I honestly don't remember much about the ride because I was tired from the flight and just staring out the window watching the coastline pass by. Eventually, we pulled up to a beautiful beachside house. Calling it a house almost felt wrong. It looked more like a small villa. The place was built right near the water with huge windows facing the ocean. Valentina's dad helped me carry my suitcase inside and showed me where I'd be staying. My room was on the lower level of the house, kind of separated from the main living area upstairs. It was technically a guest room, but it still had a great view of the beach. Through the window, I could see the sand stretching out toward the water and a set of exterior stairs that led up to the front entrance on the second floor. I unpacked my clothes and tried to settle in. A few minutes later, there was a knock at my door. It was Valentina. She wanted me to come upstairs and meet the rest of her family. Her siblings were there along with her mom. Everyone was friendly and welcoming. Her mom in particular was very kind and immediately started asking me questions about my flight and where I grew up. After about 20 minutes of conversation, Valentina suddenly announced that she wanted to go down to the beach before sunset. She said it was the perfect time to take pictures. She went upstairs to change into something more Instagram-friendly, as she put it. I went back to my room and changed into shorts. When we walked down to the beach, the sun was just beginning to dip toward the horizon. The sky had that soft orange and pink glow that people travel across the country just to see. But the beach itself was crowded. There were tons of people walking along the sand, taking photos, playing volleyball, or just watching the sunset. Valentina handed me her phone and asked me to take pictures of her. And when I say pictures, I mean a lot of pictures. She kept moving to different spots, changing poses, adjusting her hair. I must have taken close to 100 photos before she was finally satisfied. While she was looking through them, I glanced at the screen and noticed something odd. There was a man in the background of several of the pictures. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was a public beach. Of course, there were random people in the background. But the strange part was that he appeared in almost every single photo. Sometimes he was farther away, sometimes closer. But he was always somewhere behind us. And in a few of them, he appeared to be looking directly at either me or Valentina. I frowned and looked up from the phone. I scanned the beach where I had last seen him standing, but he was gone. I showed Valentina one of the photos and pointed him out. She looked at it for maybe 2 seconds before shrugging. "Probably just some random guy walking by," she said. I nodded, but something about it still felt strange. I brushed it off, though. There were too many people around for it to really mean anything. Later that night, we went back down to the beach again. One of Valentina's friends was having a small bonfire gathering. It was around midnight when we got there. People were sitting in a circle around the fire, talking, laughing, and drinking. For a while, everything felt normal. I was chatting with some of her friends when my phone started ringing. It was my boss from work. He was pretty relaxed about things, so I stepped away from the group and answered. While I was talking to him, I started looking out toward the darker part of the beach. That's when I saw him again, a figure standing near the waterline. He wasn't close to the firelight, but there was just enough light from the moon and nearby houses to make out his silhouette. He wasn't walking, he wasn't talking. He was just standing there, facing in my direction, watching. My voice trailed off for a second while I was still on the phone. My boss asked if everything was okay. I quickly said yes and tried to continue the conversation, but my attention kept drifting back toward the figure. Eventually, I turned slightly so I wasn't facing him anymore. After I finished the call, I checked again. The man was gone. That was the moment the uneasy feeling really started to grow. As the bonfire started winding down, people began leaving. Some were calling rides. Others were walking back to nearby houses. Valentina had clearly had a few drinks by that point. She suggested that we just walk back along the beach since her house was only a couple minutes away. Normally, I wouldn't have had a problem with that. But after what I had just seen, the idea of walking through the dark beach suddenly didn't sound great. Instead, I asked one of her friends, who was sober, if she could drive us home. She agreed. During the short drive, Valentina asked why I didn't want to walk. I didn't feel like explaining the whole situation, so I just joked that she was too drunk to make the walk safely. She rolled her eyes but didn't argue. When we got back to the house, I helped her upstairs. For some reason, I didn't like the idea of sleeping alone in the downstairs room that night, so I ended up staying in her room. The next day, I felt terrible. I woke up with a headache and a strong urge to throw up. I told Valentina and her parents that I probably just needed to rest for the day. They didn't question it, so I stayed in her room most of the day while everyone else went about their business. Sometime later that evening, Valentina came in and told me that her family was going out to dinner downtown. She asked if I wanted to come. I told her I still didn't feel great and would rather stay back and sleep. She said they would be back before midnight. After they left, the house became incredibly quiet. I eventually fell asleep, but at some point I started dreaming about a strange sound. It was like someone tapping repeatedly on a glass surface, fast and rhythmic. Tap, 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 tap. The sound kept getting louder until it finally woke me up. The room was dark. The tapping had stopped. I rolled onto my side and looked toward the window. That's when my entire body went cold. There was someone standing outside, a man wearing a dark hoodie, and he was waving at me through the glass. For a moment, I was too shocked to react. Then suddenly he turned and ran up the exterior stairs toward the front door. My brain immediately jumped to one terrifying thought. The front door. Was it locked? I jumped out of bed and ran to Valentina's bedroom door. I closed it and pressed my body against it. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of the front door opening somewhere upstairs. My heart started pounding. Footsteps moved through the house. Then they stopped right outside the bedroom. The door handle suddenly jerked. Once, then again. Whoever was out there started pushing harder against the door. But because I was leaning my full weight against it, it didn't open. After maybe 10 seconds, the pressure stopped. I heard footsteps moving away. That's when I grabbed my phone and called 911. It took about 5 minutes before I heard the police entering the house. When I finally felt safe enough to open the door, I ran upstairs. The officers searched the house, but the man was already gone. Valentina and her family arrived shortly after. Everyone was shaken. But the worst part came when Valentina walked into her room and screamed. In the corner of the room was a small hidden camera. The police took it as evidence. We also realized that several pieces of Valentina's clothing were missing. Even now, months later, I still think about that night. About how that man appeared in those photos earlier. About how he stood watching from the beach, and about how close he came to getting inside that room. Because one question still bothers me more than anything else. If that bedroom door hadn't been locked, what would he have done? Before we dive into the final story, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of these chilling, true horror tales. Drop a comment if this story gave you goosebumps. I'd love to hear your thoughts. The voice came from inside the shed. "Hey, could you open the door for me?" It was calm, too calm, like someone politely asking a stranger for help. But the problem was that the shed was supposed to be empty, and the footprints in the sand leading to it meant someone had been walking around the property while my girlfriend and I were asleep. The moment I heard that voice, every instinct in my body told me to get away from that door. But to explain why I was standing there in the first place, I need to go back a few days. Last year, my girlfriend and I decided to take a short trip to Palm Springs. Both of us had been working non-stop for months, and we needed a break from normal life. We didn't want a big, crowded vacation. We just wanted somewhere quiet where we could relax, sit by a pool, and forget about work for a few days. After browsing online for a while, we found a modern-looking Airbnb about 15 minutes outside the main part of the city. It was located right near the edge of the desert, where the houses start becoming more spaced out. The listing described it as very private and perfect for couples. That sounded exactly like what we wanted. The photos looked great. It was a one-story house with clean white walls, polished concrete floors, and huge glass sliding doors that opened to the backyard. Outside, there was a small pool, a couple lounge chairs, and a wooden shed off to the side that I assumed held pool equipment. Behind the property was nothing but desert sand and scattered shrubs. You couldn't really see any nearby neighbors from the backyard. When we arrived, the place looked exactly like the pictures. The host never met us in person. Instead, they had sent a door code earlier that day so we could let ourselves in. Inside, everything looked neat and modern. Minimal furniture, clean surfaces, and large windows letting in a lot of sunlight. The first day was completely normal. We unpacked our bags, went out for dinner in town, and came back to relax by the pool for a bit before going to sleep. Nothing strange happened. The first weird moment didn't occur until later that night. It was probably around 1 or 2 in the morning when I woke up suddenly. At first, I didn't know why. Then, I heard a faint sound outside. It was subtle, like something lightly bumping against the side of the house. Not loud enough to make me panic, just strange enough to wake me. I laid there listening for another minute, but the noise didn't repeat. Eventually, I convinced myself it was probably just the house settling or maybe wind hitting something outside. Desert areas can get weird temperature shifts at night, and buildings sometimes make strange noises. So I rolled over and went back to sleep. The next day, we spent most of our time outside by the pool. The weather was perfect, clear sky, warm sun, almost no wind. At one point, while we were laying in the lounge chairs, I thought I heard something again. This time it sounded like a voice somewhere far off. Not close enough to make out words, just the faint sound of someone calling out. I sat up and asked my girlfriend if she heard it. She paused for a moment and said she thought she might have heard something too. But when we looked around, there was nothing. The desert behind the fence was empty. No sidewalks, no walking paths, no obvious reason for anyone to be wandering around out there. We ended up laughing it off. Maybe someone was hiking somewhere far away. Maybe sound was just carrying weirdly across the open land. Later that night, we heard a couple more small sounds outside. Nothing dramatic. Just occasional light taps or scratches that could easily be explained by animals or wind. By the second night, we barely even noticed them anymore. But the third night was different. We had gone to bed around midnight. My girlfriend fell asleep pretty quickly, but I was still awake scrolling through my phone. After a while, I noticed something strange. Light was leaking through the edges of the bedroom blinds. At first, I thought maybe a car had driven past, but the light stayed on. Curious, I got out of bed and pulled the blinds open slightly. One of the motion lights in the backyard was on. It was the one closest to the fence. I stood there watching it for maybe 20 seconds before it suddenly switched off. Then about 10 seconds later, another light turned on further along the side of the house. That's when my stomach dropped. Because the lights weren't random. They were turning on in a pattern. Like something was moving around the outside of the property. My girlfriend woke up and asked what I was doing. I told her I thought someone might be outside. She immediately sat up and looked worried. We both watched the light through the small opening in the blinds. A third motion light turned on, this time closer to the pool. Then another near the back corner of the house. It genuinely looked like someone was walking around the yard. My girlfriend whispered for me to close the blinds completely. She kept repeating it. Close them. Close them. I slid the blinds shut and stepped away from the window. For a moment, we both just sat there in silence. I could tell she was scared. Honestly, I was too. But part of my brain kept trying to rationalize what we were seeing. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe something larger like a coyote was triggering the sensors. Still, it didn't feel right. Eventually, I said something that, looking back, was probably a terrible idea. I told her I was going to go check outside. She immediately grabbed my arm and told me not to. She said if someone was out there, the last thing I should do was confront them. But curiosity and adrenaline had already taken over. I walked into the kitchen and quietly grabbed one of the larger knives from the knife block. I didn't tell her I was doing that. I didn't want to make her more scared. Then I slowly opened the sliding glass door and stepped outside. The backyard was completely silent. I stood there listening. No voices, no footsteps, nothing. I slowly walked around the pool area, scanning the fence line and the corners of the house. After about 5 minutes of seeing nothing, I started thinking maybe we really had overreacted. Maybe an animal had set off the lights after all. That's when I noticed something in the sand. Footprints. They were clear shoe prints, not animal tracks, and they were fresh. The prints started near the side of the yard and continued toward the small shed next to the house. My heart started pounding as I followed them. Each step brought me closer to that shed. The door was closed. The footprints stopped directly in front of it. For a moment, I just stood there staring at the door. Every instinct in my body was screaming that someone might be inside. I stepped a little closer and tried to listen. At first, there was nothing. Then from inside the shed, a voice spoke. "Excuse me, could you open the door?" The voice sounded completely calm. almost friendly. Then right after that, the man inside gave a quiet little laugh. Not loud, just enough to send chills down my spine. I didn't say a word. I didn't open the door. I turned around and ran straight back to the house. I slammed the sliding door shut and locked it. My girlfriend was already standing there, wide-eyed. I told her someone was inside the shed. Her face went pale instantly. I grabbed my phone and called 911. While I was on the phone with the dispatcher explaining everything, something even worse happened. The motion lights outside started turning on again, one after another, like someone was walking around the house. But now the blinds were closed, so we couldn't see anything. Knowing someone was outside while not being able to see them was terrifying. The dispatcher told us to stay inside and keep all doors locked. Because the house was so far from town, it took the police about 20 minutes to arrive. Those 20 minutes felt like hours. Every tiny sound made us jump. Finally, we heard knocking at the front door and the officers announcing themselves. I have never felt so relieved in my life. They searched the backyard first, then they approached the shed. One officer told me to stay inside while they opened it. A few minutes later, they came back and told us no one was inside. But they did find something interesting. Inside the shed were empty water bottles, food wrappers, and a couple blankets. One officer explained that sometimes people hide in vacant properties or rental homes, especially ones in remote areas. It looked like someone might have been staying there for a while. They believed the person probably ran off when they realized we called the police. But the part that scared me the most came later. While we were packing our bags to leave, one of the officers walked into the living room holding something, a dirty baseball cap. He asked if it belonged to either of us. We both said no immediately. We had searched the house thoroughly when we arrived. That hat had definitely not been there before. The officer nodded and said it was possible the person had entered the house at some point earlier. Maybe while we were out. Maybe while we were asleep. That thought made my stomach twist, because it meant the stranger hiding in the shed might have already been inside the house before we even realized someone was out there. We packed everything immediately. The officers recommended we not stay there for the rest of the trip, so we left and drove back toward the city. We ended up staying in a cheap motel that night because it was the only place available on short notice. The next day, I contacted Airbnb support and explained everything, including the police report. Eventually, they refunded us for the remaining night, but the host never contacted us again. No explanation, no apology, nothing. Even now, I still think about how calm that voice sounded when he asked me to open the door, like he expected me to actually do it. And sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had listened. If you made it to the end, you know just how unsettling these stories can get. Make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another true horror story that will keep you up at night. And don't forget, I want to hear from you. Share your own creepy or unexplained experiences in the comments below, and your story might just be featured in a future video.